"There's a camera in your office," whispered the little girl, her breath warm with cinnamon on his sleeve. He stood frozen in the midnight lobby under the soft hum of halogen lights, watching the elevator close around her like a secret. The next day, he fired everyone. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're reading from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. Prologue, the whisper he caught a glint at the corner of her eye, a ripple of memory, a shard of something already broken. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, thin as dusk, wearing a yellow raincoat in a dry lobby. She had no badge. She had no business being there at that hour. Yet the building opened for her like it remembered her small hands on the glass. "Where are your parents?" he asked. She tilted her head and lifted one shoulder, a small bird shrug. "Working," she said. "Lots of people work late here. I wanted you to know." "Know what?" "There's a camera in your office," she said. She cupped her hand around his tie like she was telling him where treasure was buried, and her eyes held his with an intensity that caught on his ribs. "Behind the painting. It sees things you don't want it to." Before he could ask another question, the elevator opened with a polite chime. She slipped inside between a rolling mop bucket and a woman in a gray hoodie with bleached tiredness in her eyes. The doors glided shut, trimmed in polished brass that reflected him back as a silhouette with a hand still frozen mid-gesture. Elias Marrow had built Skylark systems from a rented desk and a coffee-stained notebook. He had slept on that notebook. He had set it on fire with a cigarette he shouldn't have been smoking, and he had put the fire out with his shoe. Years later, the notebook, scorched and illegible, was framed and hung in his office behind glass and a gold plate that read "Start here." At 2 in the morning, he left the lobby for the elevator with a heart that had not thudded this hard in years. On the 42nd floor, the lights brightened in deference to his presence. The glass-walled executive suite unfurled to the left, a narrow corridor of framed product photographs to the right. The night crew had left their tidy fingerprints, the faint smell of lemon, the straightened magazines, his chair set at a precise angle to his desk. Behind the desk hung the painting, oil on canvas, a wash of fog over a river. He'd bought it from a street artist in San Francisco the year Skylark broke even. He stepped close, traced the frame's lower lip, slid a finger beneath the gilded edge. Wood met skin like a familiar lie. He felt nothing at first. Then, with the slow dread of a dream that refuses to shift when you push it, an impossibly small bump beneath the leafed scrollwork. His breath snagged. He angled the desk lamp and killed the overheads. Darkness wrapped the room. In the lamplight, the grain of the frame glowed, and the little bump, no more than a pinhole, caught the beam and returned it in a dot of sheen that, once seen, could not be unseen. He pried it loose with the corner of a credit card. The lens fell into his palm, a glass eyelash, lighter than dust and heavier than sin. He turned it over. No brand, no marking, just the suggestion of a wire, clipped clean and gone. He thought of the little girl's pupils, how the tiny reflected lobby lights had been like constellations in them. He thought of the polite chime of the elevator. He thought of the word camera tasting like metal. He put the lens in his pocket like a talisman and called security. "No cameras in your office, sir," the head of security, Callum Pierce, said after a tight minute. He sounded confident in the way men sound when they can feel themselves balancing a crown and can't afford to lose a tooth. "We audit monthly." Elias turned the lens in his hand, rolling it between finger and thumb. "Check again," he said, and ended the call. When he turned the painting over, he found 4 empty screw holes drilled fresh into the back, so clean, so deliberate, they felt like a surgeon's signature. He stood there with the painting unmoored and tilted, the city's lights smeared on the window behind it, and an old taste rose in his mouth, the taste of static, of smoke. He sat at his desk and didn't sleep. Day 1, the purge, the email went out at 7:03 a.m. Subject, immediate organizational restructure. It was drafted with cold precision in a white room inside his skull. The words were efficient. The tone, the only tone he could trust, was clinical to the point of cruelty. Effective immediately, due to material operational risks and to protect the integrity of our work, Skylark Systems is restructuring. All active projects are suspended. All personnel, with the exception of critical security and compliance, are released from service. He left his signature off. By the time the line of security contractors, Men he had never met in black suits that didn't fit quite right arrived with tablets and badges and instructions. The Slack channels were on fire. He watched it from his glass office, the world he had built buckling in the wind of his own call. The floor buzzed and stilled in waves. Layla from the design team put her hand over her mouth and stood very still by her desk plant. Kyan from support wheeled his chair to Ray's desk and touched the back of her chair like it might answer him. Ray, his assistant whose calendar kept his pulse, walked into his office without knocking and closed the door behind her, only the way people who know all your children's birthdays can. Elias, she said, and it was his name loaded with a decade of nights and flights and small kindnesses. What are you doing? Restructuring, he said. By firing everyone. He looked at her and was surprised to find that she had aged overnight in the stale air of fear. She had painted her nails red the night before he noticed such things, and her index finger had a nick in the paint near the cuticle. There's a leak, he said. Worse than a leak, we're under surveillance. By whom? By somebody inside or someone with access. He held out the small lens like a spell. This was inside my office. Ray stared at it. She looked at him. This is going to ruin you. It's going to ruin us. He wanted to tell her about the girl. He wanted to tell someone something true, but the truth sat on his tongue like a coin he couldn't quite spend. It's to protect the integrity of the work, he said instead. She didn't roll her eyes. She just blinked twice, like she might be washing sand out of them. We're not pages in your notebook you can tear out. People have rent, babies, textbooks, lives. He loved Ray as he had learned to love only after he'd become a man who looked in mirrors and saw a stranger. He loved her in the small way you can love someone who oversees your life but will never be your life. I know, he said. I'm sorry. For which part? She asked. He didn't answer. She didn't ask again. By 10, the hallway outside his office sounded like the hush in a church or a funeral. People moved with boxes clutched to their ribs. The potted plants went past him like a small green exodus. Someone had stopped to take a selfie by the neon Skylark sign and had the decency to delete it shaking. 2 decades ago, he had watched his younger sister, June, pack everything she loved into a backpack, a cracked doll with a face that had seen too much, a book missing pages, a scarf their mother had knitted crooked. He had watched her slide that pack onto her narrow shoulders and stand at the door with her sneakers on the wrong feet because she had not yet learned to tell left from right, and he hadn't corrected her. He had told himself then and now that he had time to fix anything. Maya Fen, his CFO, walked in with her mouth a hard line. Have you lost your mind? She asked. She didn't bother to sit. She was a precise woman whose hair never strayed, even at 3 a.m. when spreadsheets refused to sum. The board is calling emergency session in 90 minutes. Journalists are already calling me. There's a camera in my office, he said. He didn't expect it to sound like a confession. Someone is watching. She didn't even look at the walls. They always are. She pointed at the email on her phone like it was an open wound. But this is arson. He closed his hand around the lens in his pocket until the edges bit. The only way to stop a rot is to cut until it bleeds clean. You don't cut the tree down to save a branch, she said, and you don't put lives into boxes because you're afraid. I'm not afraid, he said in a voice that gave him away. She studied him, and he braced for the blow that didn't come. I'm going to tell you something, she said softly. Whatever you think you're hiding is already out. Whatever you think you can burn is already on someone's screen. Firing the village doesn't put the fire out. It took a moment for the words to land in him. When they did, they scattered like birds. He nodded once. We'll see, he said entirely to the window. He watched Maya leave. He watched Kyan's shoulders slope as he pushed a cardboard box into the elevator. He watched Layla give the plant to the security man because she didn't want to carry it on the bus, and it felt too small to put in a cab. He watched Ray close his door again without looking back. At noon, the board filed into the conference room with the sleekness of knives. Deanne Alcott, chair, led the procession with a smile that would be described as gracious by people in profiles who had never been in a room with her. Elias, she said, palms up, like she was welcoming him to his own execution. We're disappointed. You can imagine my feelings, he said. She folded herself into the leather at the head of the table. What on earth compelled you to, what did you call it, protect the integrity of our work by emptying the building? We're exposed. To what? She asked, sip of water delicate. Rumor, fear, your conscience. He slid the lens across the table. It stopped before her like a chessed piece mid-game. She didn't touch it. Do you know how many cameras are in this building, Elias? Every entrance, every hallway. Your parlor trick doesn't move me. He felt the blow to his sternum the way a diver feels water fold around him. This was in my office. And now your office is empty, she said, all kindness gone. You will rehire. You will issue a public statement about a system's error, and you will apologize. He picked up the lens and rejected a dozen answers that would taste like victory and feel like defeat. No, he said, surprising both of them. We're unclean. Unclean. She turned her head to make sure she heard him. Stop talking like a prophet. You run a software company. You are not a priest. He thought of the little girl saying, it sees what you don't want it to, and for the first time since dawn, he felt unable to sit. He stood, and the chair rolled back with a soft hiss. You don't know what it's seen, he said. No, she agreed, but I know what everyone else has seen today, and it's you burning your own house down on the lawn. Put the fire out, or I will. He left the room like people leave hospitals when the only thing waiting for them inside is news. Ghosts in glass, he walked the empty floor at 2 again, and the building sang its midnight songs, the chime of elevators that had forgotten the cadence of footsteps, the sigh of the HVAC like a tired animal, the cleaning crew's hush moving like a tide across the carpet. He took off his shoes and set them by Ray's desk, and the carpet felt like moss on his socks. He rubbed his forefinger along the nick in her nail polish on his memory, ridiculous, and almost laughed. He turned the painting over again. The holes were there, 4 perfect ovals, mocking him with their symmetry. He ran a nail along one, and a splinter lodged under his skin. The pain was immediate, bright, petulant. He sucked his fingertip and tasted the tang he had been tasting since he was 12. The glass door to his office reflected him, a figure in a white shirt untucked at the waist, a man who had not slept, a boy who had outlived the night by accident. Ripples of motion flickered at the edge of the reflection. He turned. She was there. Yellow jacket, bare legs, sneakers scuffed gray. She stood by the printer like she belonged to it. She held out her palm. You dropped something, she said. In her hand lay a small screw, golden, smiling like a tooth. Then she curled her fingers, and it was empty. No, I guess you didn't, he whispered. Who are you? She said. You're Elias Marrow. You know that already. Everyone knows that part. What part don't they know? That you forgot how to listen before you learned how to speak. He swallowed. What's your name? She tilted her head. Shadows made waves across her face like clouds lit from underneath. Leora, she said, and her mouth made the syllables like a door opening. My dad knew you were the kind of man who would look away. He told my mom to forgive you, but she doesn't have to. Where's your mom? She's cleaning, Leora said, looking down the hall. She's always cleaning. I help sometimes. I like the smell. If you can smell lemon, you can pretend the bad things are over. She reached up and wrote something on the glass pane of his door with her finger. The letters bloomed in the condensation of her breath. Listen, he stepped closer. Leora, he said softly, tasting her name for what it was, a petition. Why did you tell me? You were awake, she said simply. I thought maybe you could do a different kind of thing than you usually do. She looked to the floor where a tide of dust gathered at the baseboard like regret. You did a same kind thing instead. The firings. It wasn't a question. She blew on the glass again and drew a camera, a square with a circle inside and 3 eyelashes for legs. You killed the wrong thing, she said, and stepped back, her reflection shrinking into the night. Wait, he said, and the sound of a mop bucket rolling over tile swallowed the word as if that was what the floors did hear, took words and made them soft until nobody had to hear them. He found the night crew in the lobby cafe. A woman with a gray hoodie poured coffee into paper. A man with shoulders like a rebuilt bridge wiped the counter, even though it began the day clean. The woman looked up as if she was always expecting to be told to move. Farah, he guessed, because that was the name on the janitorial contract he never read more than once. She stiffened, then nodded. Mr. Marrow. Her voice contained a whole nervous geography. Is there a problem? No, he said, and then, yes, and then, I met your daughter. Farah's face changed in a way that only pictures in frames usually let you see, rapid, private, pleading. She's not supposed to bother anyone. She didn't bother me, he said. She told me the truth. Farah exhaled a breath that seemed too long to have been held only since he started speaking. She's too young to hold her tongue against it, she said. Even when it hurts. Did you put a camera in my office? He asked. She lowered her eyes to the napkin she was folding into a perfect triangle. The fluorescent lights above them made a halo of oil on the countertop. I was told it was illegal, she said, by way of an answer, but not as illegal as leaving my husband in the dark and never saying his name. Elias didn't say I'm sorry. The words are useless when they carry no specifics. His name, he said, because specificity was all he had to offer, was Nabal, she said, and the syllables blew dust off the floor of his chest. He worked nights at Parkside West to supplement his hours here. He came home in boots that smelled like rain, and he made pancakes on Sundays. He scraped money into a coffee can to teach Leora how to swim when the pools opened in June. He was 37 on the day the roof at Parkside fell and tore the lighting rig down, and even if he had lived, they would still have called it an accident. Elias tasted the syllable of a date, months ago and also today. He saw a PDF page in black and white. He saw a file on a server with a name like Horizon 7. He saw himself with a memory drive in his pocket the size of his thumbnail and the sweat on his back like a hand. Farah continued, I was told there was an internal investigation. I was told someone from Skylark had to approve the report before it went to the insurance, to the union, to anyone. A month passed. Then, too, the report never came. Nabal came home in my daughter's dreams and never in my bed. A man calling himself a friend of a friend asked me if I wanted answers or peace. I said, what's peace without truth? He gave me a camera no bigger than a ladybug and told me the hole in the wall was already there. He said, put it behind the painting. I said, how do I get past the guard? He said, you clean. They will hold doors open for you. Elias sat because his legs had become a question. Did you watch the footage? She shook her head. The man who gave me the camera said it would upload to a place I would never know. He said not to carry evidence. He said evidence is a weight that sinks women like me. He said to hold the mop and watch the clock and keep my child from speaking to powerful men. Leora appeared at the cafe doorway, barefoot, carrying her sneakers by their laces. I didn't, she said to her mother, with a small defiance that made Elias want to give her a dozen medals. I told him. Farah's tired smile carved her into someone else for a moment. You did, she whispered, smoothing Leora's hair back, gaze slicing to Elias. Please don't punish her. Please don't punish me for wanting to know. I punished everyone, he said to no one and everyone. Farah tilted her head. Not everyone, she said, and he understood she meant himself. The server in the wall, he couldn't go home. His house had grown something that didn't like sunlight. He stayed in the building until dawn and wandered the service hallways like a pilgrim who had lost the map and would have to rely on the smell of incense to find God. On the 26th floor, the maintenance closet was unlocked. He opened it because he could. Inside, the powder of plaster dust uncurled in his throat. The water heater hummed like someone whispering their prayers. A metal panel sat on the back wall like it had been put there by someone who wanted you to believe it had always been put there. He unscrewed it with a dime. Behind it, in a shallow cavity in the drywall, lived a small black server with 2 green lights winking asleep. No brand, no marking. He touched it and felt it warm. He traced the thin cable that slid like a vein down into the floor. He realized his hands were shaking and made them stop by will. There was a switch. He flipped it, and the server woke like a cat. A small screen blinked, a tricksy little interface. He had built front ends with more honesty. He tapped through until he found the stream. It opened without login. It opened directly into his office at night. He saw himself in grainy grayscale, moving like a story you tell wrong the first time. He watched as months peeled backward with a slide of his finger. He landed on a date. It wasn't marked, but his bones knew it like birthdays. Night, his office, rain on the window in threads. On the desk, a folder with a plastic binding, a bottle of water, a silver drive. He saw himself enter dripping, city stitched to his shoulders. He watched himself take the folder and hold it a long time like it hurt to grip. He watched his face as he flipped it open and scanned black letters that he didn't need to read to know. He watched his hand pull the drive from the port, then push it in again. A man glimpsed by glass, chewing his lower lip raw. He watched himself stand. He walked to the credenza where the framed notebook burned behind glass with its gold plate that reads "Start here." He took the frame down. He used the flat edge to pry up a floorboard. He dropped the drive into the hollow and slid the board back like burying a small animal. He watched himself feed the folder into the shredder a page at a time with a tenderness that was almost love. He watched himself stand very still after the last page, tilt his head as if he had heard a child. On the other side of the screen, Elias stopped the video. He closed his eyes. The building hummed like it had always been humming, but now he heard notes he had tuned out for years. He reached into his pocket and brought out the little lens. He placed it on the edge of the drywall cavity. It looked like truth does when it is too small to see unless it's the only thing you look for. After a while, he slid the floorboard in his office back. The drive was there, flush against the joist like a heart. He held it up to the light and absurdly wished it had weight. He plugged it into his laptop. The files were there, salted with false names and acronyms, an internal memo flagged urgent and read before distribution and delay, pending legal. The report, Nabal Sale, Parkside West. Lighting rig failure due to rushed installation of third-party hardware to meet end-of-quarter marketing demo. Bolt integrity compromised by non-compliant substrate. 1 fatality. 2 injured. Recommending immediate disclosure and suspension of demo. He scrolled. Email chains that were a choreography of gloved hands moving currency. My suggestion would be to delay any external communications to avoid reputational damage until after our roadshow concludes. We will make the family whole, wrote Deanne Alcott in legal perfect sentences with all the warmth of a blueprint. Please find a way to mitigate immediate reporting risk. And there, a reply from himself to himself in the cold middle of a sleepless night. We can't afford this. Delay until after. Looking at the letters now, he didn't recognize the man who had typed them. He recognized the hunger, the black hole at the center that devoured and devoured until only tinfoil traces of starlight were left. He tasted smoke. When he was 12, he had left June on the couch because his mother had called from her graveyard shift to ask for cat food, and he was going to go to the corner store, and he was going to be back before the cartoon ended, and he didn't see smoke until he turned the corner end. He ran home, and the doorway was a mouth with a black tongue, and the fireman said it wasn't his fault and homeroom collected money in a coffee, with his last name scrawled in Sharpie, as if that could keep a child from knowing the weight of his own guilt. It is rot that makes men powerful when they have nothing else. It is rot that trains you to choose the paper you can control over the truth that can undo you. He had built himself on it like a foundation poured over a grave. He knew then that firing everyone was not an act of protection, but an act of instinct, smothering flames with blankets ripped from beds, not caring who he exposed to cold. Calls Naomi Blair left a message, and then another. She was a journalist whose stories made men sit straighter because she wrote with a scalpel. He had envied her once. He had wondered what it would be like to know you were good at something that didn't require other people's fear. I have video, she said when he answered finally. She didn't waste her grace on small talk. A view of your office at night, we both know what it shows. My deadline is 4 p.m. I wanted to hear your side before I publish. Publish what? He asked to buy himself the sound of his own voice upside down. Do I need to read you the caption? She asked. CEO shreds fatality report as worker's widow waits for news. I can be kinder than that, but I won't lie. He looked at the lens on his desk and pressed it flat into wood. Did Farah give you the footage? My source is protected, she said. But since you've named her, I'll say this, she did not put the words in your mouth. She did not move your fingers on the keys. Is there anything I can say that changes your headline? You could say the truth, she said, almost gentle. You could give me a quote I'll print bigger than your detractors. You could put his name on your tongue. He did. He said, Nabal Sale, and something in him made a sound that had been waiting under his lungs since spring. You have 3 hours, she said. Use them to become a person you can live with. He sat in his office and stared at his hands like they had been left to him by someone less careful. He called Maya. She didn't answer. He called Ray. She did. Is the building still where we left it? She asked, a sniff in her voice that might have been a laugh if anything was funny. Yes, he said. I think I need to ask for help. Good, she said, because you didn't fire me technically. I quit in my head before the email went out. Ray, he said, surprised by the ache in his own voice. I have to, he stopped because he didn't know if choose was the word for it. I need to make a statement. Not the kind I usually do. "I'll come in," she said, not making him say what he couldn't yet. At one, they rigged a camera on his desk, the honest kind with a flashing red light and a tripod that ached in his neck just looking at it. Ray set a glass of water within reach and moved the lamp shade until the light quit making him look older than he felt. She covered the nick in her nail with a bandage, and he didn't say anything because he wasn't allowed to say small things anymore. "What do I call this?" he asked, gesturing to the empty space where a press release usually grew. "A beginning," she said. He looked straight into the lens and saw himself as others would, a man whose name had been printed in magazines with numbers attached to it, a son whose mother had died before he could pay off her work, a brother who had failed to smell smoke. He pushed the words out like stones. "My name is Elias Marrow," he said. "I founded Skylark Systems before I knew the price of naming things after birds. I'm here to tell you that I have failed. I have failed a family and a worker whose name is Nabal Sale. I have failed my employees by believing that the only way to make a safe was to cut them loose. I have failed myself by building a life around the belief that success makes you clean." He breathed and let the breath carry him past a point where he could turn back. "Months ago, a piece of equipment at a partner site failed because we were in a hurry. It killed a man. The report concluded that we should tell the truth and stop. I delayed. I shredded the report. I told myself it was so we could handle it better later. I told myself a lie because it fit." He called the board out by name. He did not hide himself in their shadows. "I will not sign an agreement that keeps me from naming what we did or paying for it. I am stepping down from my role as CEO effective immediately. I am liquidating my personal shares and assets to create a trust in Nabal's name, administered by people who do not owe me anything. I invite my fellow executives to do the same. Our former employees will be paid for the remainder of the year whether they come back or not. You were not the ones who failed. We were." He swallowed. Ray stepped closer, then stopped, respecting a distance that had kept both of them safe for years. He continued, "I am asking that Skylark be placed under independent oversight effective today. I will sit with investigators and tell them what I remember without polishing it to make myself shine. If the law asks for me, I will go." He looked down at his hands, because looking up felt like a thing he didn't deserve yet. "If there's any grace left for a man who learned to listen too late, I ask that you direct it first to Farah and Leora, who told me something I should have known already. And if you're watching this and you work somewhere that asks you to bury something that belongs to the living, I am asking you, don't. Put it on the table where everyone can see it and let the light judge it." He ended the recording and felt, not relief, but the way you feel when a tooth you've been tonguing finally leaves your mouth. You miss it, and it stopped hurting in the same breath. The River Deanne called twice while they uploaded the video. He didn't answer. Naomi called as soon as it went live and told him her headline was changing. "Men who say their own names deserve that much," she said, not bending so much as adjusting her posture, and then she hung up because her job was to hold a line he had stepped over already. At 4:30, a courier served him with papers that said his tenure was over, his financials frozen, his house on the table. The papers were polite. He had learned so much about polite. He walked out of the building at dusk. The Skylark sign buzzed green behind him like a memory of faith. On the steps, a cluster of people waited, some with phones against their faces like weapons, some with faces open like field at noon. Layla was there with her plant flexing its hopeful leaves, Kyan with his box, Maya with her hair for once not perfect. "I needed you to do something like this before you asked us to," she said, by way of greeting. He nodded because that was the kind of sentence that doesn't ask for words in return. Ray tucked a piece of paper into his pocket with a hand that had typed his life for years. "For court," she said, "and for the grocery store in case you remember you are a person who eats." Farah stood a little apart, hands in her hoodie like she was hiding her heart from the wind. Leora climbed the railing and sat with her feet swinging, fearless the way children are before math finds them. He walked to them because that felt like his job now. "You told the truth," Leora said without flourish. "Good. I told some of it," he said. "The part I could hold in one hand without dropping it. I have more in the other." "That's how it works," Farah said, her voice not unkind. "We bring what we can carry to the table. If we learned that as children, we would not think we have to carry the whole house." He handed Farah an envelope with a copy of the trust agreement inside, and the name of a lawyer Naomi had recommended printed on the letterhead like a warning. "It's not enough," he said, "but it's a thing I know how to do." She took it, not smiling, not crying. "He used to say," she said, eyes on the sky where the first evening birds cut lines through blue, "that the thing about truth is that it washes you, but only after it knocks you down. He'd say, hold your breath, it will spit you up somewhere you can stand." "He was right," Elias said. "It's cold here. Colder when you're alone," she said. "Don't make that mistake again." He looked at Leora. "Thank you for whispering." She shrugged the way that had started this. "It would have found you anyway," she said, "but it needed to hear itself in the air first." He turned the lens over in his pocket. He had brought it with him as if it would be asked to testify. He took it out. It lay in his palm like a seed. He walked to the river, the one in the painting, now real and dirty and honest, and tossed the lens into the water. It vanished without ceremony. A gull, dove, and rose, and pretended none of this had to do with it. "Are all the cameras gone?" Leora asked. He watched the way the setting sun turned the water into shards. He felt, somewhere deep where the boy inside had built a room, something open a window. "No," he said, "there's one left." "In your phone?" she asked, because she was 7 and modern. "In here," he said, touching his chest lightly. "The one that stops me from lying to myself." She scrunched her nose. "Don't turn that one off." He laughed then, a small laugh, the good kind that lives like a shy creature in tall grass and only enters your yard when you forget you need it. "I don't think I can anymore." What comes after they called him to court. He went. He sat at a table that made him feel small and answered questions that made him feel smaller until, strangely, he didn't feel small at all. He felt specific. The headlines were bad, then better, then accurate in the ways that matter. Skylark's stock fell, then hovered like a bird that had been winged but not broken. The board was asked very carefully to explain emails that used the future tense where the present was needed. Oversight moved into empty offices and made coffee on old machines and opened windows that had been painted shut. Some employees came back. Some didn't. The office turned on its lights again, this time softer, like a person who has just woken from a dream they are not ready to talk about. Ray started writing herself notes in the second person because she had learned it was easier to take instructions from a voice that sounded like hers. Meyer accepted a job at a smaller firm with eyes wide open and a promise taped above her screen, "Tell them when it hurts." Farah took days off and took Leora to the pool when June finally came. Leora put her face in the water and blew bubbles like secrets are supposed to stay. When she lifted her head, she wiped her eyes with both fists and grinned like a hard answer. "I did it," she said, and Farah said, "Yes." On a cold morning months later, Elias stood outside the building again. The Skylark sign buzzed a new shade. He had sold his house and moved into an apartment where the windows opened without sticking. He had learned how to buy groceries with cash, and he had learned how to sleep sometimes. He had learned to say his sister's name out loud in the kitchen. June. He had learned to leave his front door without triple-checking the stove because the only fires that mattered were the ones he could name. He had started showing up at places where the wires in walls were no longer metaphors. He stood in city council meetings and said words like disclosure in a voice that had learned to kind of sing. He sat in back rows of union halls and nodded because some sentences are sermons. He stopped turning away when men cried. He carried a small notebook everywhere now. He wrote in it. The pages were white, and he never lit cigarettes near it. The cover read "Start here" in plain black ink because he did not trust gold anymore. One day, he found a note tucked under his windshield wiper, a piece of paper folded into a square the size of a lucky stone. Inside, in careful, childish letters, it said, "We see you. Keep listening." He turned the paper over and saw a camera sketched in pencil, a square with a circle inside and 3 eyelashes for legs. He kept it in his breast pocket like a saint, because saints are not the only ones who should get to have something pressed against their hearts to remind them of the cost of being alive. When he passed the river on evenings he looked down where the lens would be if the river had a way to catch and keep it. He thought about a child's whisper in a lobby and 1,000 lives boxed into cardboard, and how cardboard makes a particular sound when it scrapes on carpet, like a soft apology you can miss if you're not listening. He listened. And when he turned from the water to the world, He did so without the fear of his steps burning a trail he would have to clean up later with words. He walked like a man who knows he cannot bring anyone back, and still, he can call them by their names, so they won't be alone in rooms without windows. He walked like this is what it means, in the end, not to be forgiven, but to forgive the part of yourself that didn't know better in time, and to make something with the hands you have left, with the pieces you didn't throw away without cameras to prove it, except the one that always watches and, finally, isn't cruel.